Shabbat Shalom. So in Jewish law, there are many points of property issues, just like you'll find in American law, British law, Canadian law. Who owns what and who has a legitimate claim? This kind of matters. You might have noticed people are attached to their stuff. So for example, if Bernie and I were each to come before a court, and each of us holding on to a cloak, the talit in the ancient world, and Bernie said, "This is all mine," and I said, "This is all mine," what should the dayan, what should the judge do? Just imagine there's no security camera footage, there's no Columbo way CSI to figure out who actually had it originally. We both have a precisely equal claim to the totality of that thing that we're holding between us. Cut it in half. Cut it in half. If I can't be sure as a judge whether it's all his or all his, I split the difference. Now, gee, that must make everybody happy, right? Okay, now there are some workarounds for this, which would be where one party would pay for the value of the other party's half, and then one person can keep the entire thing and the other person gets the monetary equivalent of their portion. But even still, presumably, one person got more than they probably should have. One person probably didn't have a legitimate claim to the whole of what they were grabbing, but because we were unable to tell whether it was his or his, he ended up with a portion of it. And that must really irk the other guy, the guy who knows that he did have a stronger claim, he just lacked any proof or evidence to establish it. Keep that in mind of how they must have felt as they walked away from the courthouse and how the community must have felt knowing. One of them probably came out a winner on this and the other a loser. We just couldn't tell which. Last week in the Torah, we were talking about another thorny case. This was the case of the daughters of Zelophehad. Now, these daughters came before Moses and said, "Hey, we've got a problem. You're busy talking about how we're going to divide up the land of Israel among all of the ancestral houses of our people, the clans that came from each of the tribes. But our father, he died while we were out schlepping in the desert. Now, he should have gotten a share of that land as being one of the heads of household of one of the sub-clans of our tribe. But he's dead, so who's going to get his portion of land? Because he had no sons. And as so far you've only said that land is inherited according to the male line, father, son, we, the daughters, are concerned that our father's possession, our father's property, will simply be lost among the rest of our nation." And Moses said, "You've got a good point." And he went to God, and God said, "They've got a good point." And so there was a ruling that was issued in last week's Torah portion that said, if a man has no sons, then his property will pass to his daughters instead. Problem solved, right? Well, kind of. Because it turns out there's more to the family than just that little nuclear bubble. And in this week's Torah portion, the rest of the family shows up in front of Moses and says, knocking on the tent, "Mr. Moses, sir, you know how you told the daughters of our cousin that they get to inherit? We've got a question about that, because you know how the land's going to be divided up according to each of the tribes? You know, Manasseh's going to be here, and Yehuda's going to be there, and Benjamin's there. Well, what happens if these ladies marry somebody from another tribe? Because then that other tribe guy is going to own land that was originally given to our tribe. And that means his sons will inherit what should have been part of our family's inheritance." And Moses said, "You've got a good point." Now this is a little trickier than a talit. How do you cut this down the middle? How do you both allow the inheritance to continue in the case where there is no sons, but also make sure that the land stays with the original tribe and family that it was given to, so that it will remain a forever inheritance. Well, it's not as hard if you're God. The rest of us would have struggled, but God gave a compromise. He said, it's a very good point they raise. Here's what you're going to do. In the case where a man dies, leaving no sons, the daughters will inherit. However, they, if they want to maintain possession of the land, have to get married to somebody from within the tribe that their father came from. So, they have a more limited palette from which to choose their husbands. They have to get married to somebody who, at least by some extension of the family tree, would also have a claim on this particular piece of land. That way the land will both stay within his name, and it will also be within the family line. And I imagine that both the daughters of Zelophehad and their cousins, who brought this counterclaim, walked away from Moses saying, why do I have to get married to just these people? I mean, come on, we can't go get married to anyone. We're going to tie a hand behind my back. It's hard enough to find a nice Jewish husband, and now we can only pick from one of the people from our... And the cousins, on the other hand, probably said, well, wait a minute, they can get married to anyone in the tribe, but what about just like our clan? Because this was meant to be our clan. This is our cousin's land, not our triple cousin over there far removed in the other part of the family tree. This means they could get married to some guy that isn't even totally related to us, but just on an offshooting branch that comes from our family. I'm not sure about that. That's not what we were really looking for. And usually, as a general rule of thumb, I would like you to understand, if two parties walk away from having reached a compromise, and neither one of them is completely happy, you've succeeded. That's called success. That's what a compromise is. Victory is where you walk over the face of someone else, and they get 0 and you get 100. Loss is where someone walks over you, and you get 0 and they get 100. Compromise is where you get some of what you want, and they get some of what you want, but both of you realize that you're better off if each of you give and get some, rather than getting 100%. Because there is no way to get 100% without causing other irreparable damage to the group, to the community, to the society, to the family. And by compromising and willingly putting aside some element of what you might have also dreamed you could get, you are putting as a higher priority the peace, the harmony, the unity of the group that you are within. Because ultimately that is the purpose of Torah and all of its legislation, all of its commands. It's not there just to give us some niggling set of rules, but it is there to give us a set of rules to help continue to reinforce and bind us together. But if we insist constantly, adamantly, without willing to compromise on 100% of exactly what I claim is mine each and every time, and if I'm going to walk away from every opportunity to compromise, every opportunity to see that perhaps the person I am arguing with has at least some legitimacy to their claim, and maybe I should allow some to go to them while some comes to me for the sake of something more important than just this piece of land or just this piece of cloth. If you refuse to do that, then you're not truly being bound by the law at all. You are only using the law as a weapon to get what you want, rather than using it as a tool, an instruction to guide you in what you should want. The law is not there just to validate you. It is there to help create the combined effect, the emergent property of a respecting and mutually accepting community. But that only works if we're willing to look at the other person and say, you know what? You're more important than me getting everything I want. And so, I'll compromise. And together, We'll make this work. Shabbat Shalom.